Hi, my name is Chris Martens, and the subject of this video review is the Avid Volvere Turntable, its companion Altus Tonearm, and their companion Avid Ionic Moving Coil Phono Cartridge. I've worked in various editorial capacities for the Absolute Sound, Hi-Fi Plus, and a number of other next screen publications. For those of you who may not be familiar with AVIDHIFI Limited, let me give you a little bit of background that I think will help. AVIDHIFI Limited is, as you would guess from the Limited, a British audio company. And it's based in Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire, England. Now, those of you who might remember studying the back panel of quad electrostatic loudspeakers, or for that matter, DCS digital components, will realize that they too are from that same part of England. And it'd be fair to say that it's a true hotbed of high-end audio activity. Avid, as a company, is perhaps most famous for its turntables, although the company by no means stops there. To help place things, the Volvere is in the second tier down of Avid turntables. The top of the range are known as Altus models, and they're in about the $30,000 plus US range. The next bracket down is the sequel range that features two models, which at a distance could almost appear to be identical, and they are the sequel turntable and the Volvere. The Volvere, in a package where you get the turntable, the arm, and the cartridge, sells for about $12,999 US. Your mileage may vary. And then the next part of the range down is called the Diva range, and the entry level is the Ingenium range, which is, as Avid would have it, they consider that their plug-and-play turntable. This one is one that came recommended to us by the folks at Avid as being big bang for the buck in a high-end sense of that term, and one that gives you an awful lot for the $12,000 you plunk out to acquire it. And we'll explain why in just a moment. Avid is led by a gentleman named Conrad Moss, and you may have heard of him in any discussion of high-end turntables. In 1977, as a 16-year-old, he got fascinated with turntables and decided he really wanted to pursue building top-class tables. And more than a decade later, he founded Avid. The original Altus model followed in fairly short order, and then over the ensuing years, the other members of the range came into being. But wait, there's more. Avid, alone amongst, well, I shouldn't say alone, but nearly alone amongst high-end turntable manufacturers, is a full-service manufacturer, meaning they build turntables, tone arms, phono cartridges, phono stages, preamps, amplifiers, and a full range of high-end loudspeakers. All of these designed and built by Avid. So you could easily put together an all Avid system. An unusual characteristic for a high-end audio company, because high-end companies tend to specialize just in one thing, and that's their thing. Avid isn't like that. Conrad Moss would, I think, say that this turntable is based around an energy transmission philosophy, and in that sense, he's perhaps at least akin to the good folks at Riga. in that he wants to get information out of the cartridge, extraneous vibration away from the tone arm, away from the subchassis, away from the system, leaving just the music behind, or at least that's very much the theory. Okay, so let's take a little bit closer look at the Volvere. What the folks at Avid would tell you is that the Volvere benefits from a lot, and I mean a lot, of trickle-down technology from the Altus range. And in practical terms, here's what that means. This is a high rigidity, high precision turntable that is a suspended design with a very clever suspension. So let's start from the top and work our way down. The Volvere has a large 6.7 kilogram cast platter, a precise bearing that features a tungsten carbide ball that rides atop a pillar and that rests against a sapphire thrust plate. So the idea is that you've got a really precise main bearing and one that requires no lubrication ever. And then it is a belt drive table, or I guess I want to say a belts drive table, in that there are actually two drive belts. They wrap around a cast in place inner subplatter. And if you've done much turntable setup work, you will probably immediately say, okay, how do you get the belts on then? And the answer is that you take the dual drive belts, wrap them around the inner platter on the inside, and stretch them over a temporary post. Then you lower the platter down onto the main bearing assembly, positioning it so the belts drop down over the motor pulley, and you reach underneath the platter and very delicately lift the belts off and into their proper grooves on the motor drive pulley, and then you remove the temporary post so that the turntable is free to operate. And the only advice that Avid provides is rotate the platter very slowly by hand until the belts are properly seated, because the motor is a high torque enough design that if you don't do that, there's the possibility that it would spit the belts the first time you power it up. And we don't want that. So this all works, sits atop a cast, not stamped, cast aluminum subchassis, which also carries the arm board. And the arm board, conveniently enough, arrives from the factory set up for an SME profile tonearm mounting hole, which, by the way, all of the Avid tonearms also use. So gives a nice degree of universality. Then you'll notice, and I'll attempt to jiggle this a little bit so you can see, the subchassis has three downward facing pillars, and they're hollow and have a little screw attachment on the inside of each one, and they lower into three suspension towers that are mounted on a subplinth. And these things are just beautifully made. So you take the whole table, lower it down into its suspension mount, and the gist of things is that the vertical aspect of the suspension is carried by coil springs in each one of the mounting towers. That takes care of vertical movement, but there's also at each corner a little rubber band that locates the entire upper chassis horizontally. And for what it's worth, the two suspension systems have similar but deliberately not identical resonant frequencies. And by changing the bands and so on, you could conceivably alter the damping frequency of the suspension. Then, last but not least, this lower section has a high torque. I think it's rated for 55 Newton meters of torque motor permanently mounted to this plate. And down below, these feet are adjustable. So you have two ways to adjust platter level. You can stick an Allen key wrench down in the top pillar here and dial it and achieve level that way, or you can dial the feet and achieve level that way. As fate would have it, my rack, which is made by Solid Tech in Sweden, was very nicely set up over time so that it's pretty much dead level. And I found that when I positioned the lower plinth, the upper subchassis, and so on, and then plunked a clear audio leveling bubble on the top of the table, it came out just dead level right out of the box. But fear not, if you got one of these and it doesn't sit dead level, there are plenty of adjustment mechanisms so that you can get it squared away. Then, one thing well worth noting is that Avid uses a DSP-controlled motor speed controller box that is, and this is not a misprint, it is hand-tuned to the characteristics of each individual Volvere motor. So, although it's a little difficult to conceptualize, this box and the Volvere motor are really one integral unit. And in fact, Avid stresses that you can't do plug and play. You can't take the motor box from a different Volvere and plug it in and get the same results. And I think this really speaks volumes for their attention to detail. They're trying to dial out sources of motor vibration right at the root, right from the speed control box. And the way the speed controller box works is it can, at the push of a button, switch from 33 1/3 RPM to 45, or by pressing a slightly different combination of buttons, you can fine tune the absolute speed of either motor speed setting. I found that it was just dead on, and so I didn't want to tamper with that aspect of it, kind of following the "if it ain't broke, do not fix it" theory. So that's the table in a nutshell. Suspended design, very sophisticated suspension, dual belt driven, very quiet.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks. And now back to the show.
The Avid Tonearm used in the Volvere package is called the Altus, and it's one of two that Avid offers. The other is called the Nexus, which is an even higher end model. The two are so similar that at 20 paces you could mistake one for the other, but the key differences are these. The Nexus model uses pretty exotic materials for its tonearm tube, whereas the Altus uses thick-walled aluminum tubing for the main tube. And that's really close to it. Both arms feature micron tolerance gimbaled bearings, beautifully made. They feature a really distinctive anti-skate mechanism, which is controlled via this little knob right here. And the idea with it is that, just as is true of the vinyl record itself, which requires, truthfully, slightly different anti-skating forces as the arm moves across the record, well, so too does the Altus and also the Nexus Tonearm have a setup that self-adjusts anti-skating forces to mimic the characteristics of the record itself. So what you have is a deceptively simple looking but really beautifully executed arm with a clever anti-skating mechanism and is set to use with a wide range of cartridges. Which brings us to the ionic moving coil cartridge. Avid has its phono cartridges built to its specifications by a third-party firm, which is fairly common practice. And what goes on is that they regard the ionic, which in England sells for right around £2,000, and that makes it $2,500 plus in US dollars. The ionic features an aluminum stylus cantilever and an elliptical stylus. And it looks like an open or naked coil design at first glance, but when you look really close, there's actually sort of a little metal half pipe guard sleeve that goes on the bottom of the cartridge. The next two models up are the boron and the ruby, which, you guessed it, have boron and ruby cantilevers and even more exotic styli. But for some people, the belief is that this model is actually just enough more forgiving that it's easier to set up, and it also works at least reasonably well with a wider range of records, whereas a stylus that had more of a fine line profile might offer you higher absolute performance on a really great disc, but it also might put you through a going to the dentist experience on less than great discs. So lest you think, oh, well, this has the cheapy cartridge, not necessarily the case. So when we received the table, we bolted up the ionic in the arm, performed all the adjustments necessary to get overhang and stylus rake angle and vertical tracking angle right, and then set in to give it a listen. What observations can I give you? First, this thing is quiet, really quiet. And that's not to say it's the quietest turntable you'll ever encounter, given some of the models out there in the $100,000 class. That would probably be a silly statement. But it's quiet enough that it provides a pretty resounding answer to the question, gee, is there really any point in stepping up beyond the $1,000 turntable or $5,000 turntable class? And the answer is, as they would say in Minnesota, yes, sir, you betcha. It's one of those scenarios where you don't so much notice an absence of noise, where you would sit and listen to the table and say, oh, listen to that quiet. What it really is that you notice how much easier it is to access low-level information in the discs you're playing. And you also notice that when you encounter inevitable ticks and pops in records, the system post-pop drops right back down to quiescence just immediately. So that instead of having this tick, tick, with the Avid, you have tick and then nada. So it's really, really quiet. It's the quietest turntable I've ever had in my home. Next, you notice that it's capable, with the right cartridge, arm, and overall setup, of just astonishing bass. Astonishing in power, in depth, and especially pitch definition. So that if you happen to be, as I am, a great fan of, say, Jaco Pastorius, when you hear one of Jaco's bass lines through this turntable, you have this, oh, that's how it's supposed to sound moments where you can hear the classic jazz bass growl. And similarly, if you hear a recording with acoustic bassist Charlie Hayden playing, you realize how effortlessly complex his tonalities are and how he's varying his pitch signatures and attack and decay characteristics in real time in these remarkably subtle ways that the Avid just disentangles really effortlessly. Next, I'd say that on a good recording, and it does require a good recording. If the recording's not willing, the table isn't either. But when it is a good recording, the Avid can produce darn near three-dimensional imaging. And to give you an idea of where I'm going with this, I happened to be observing this just last night, where I was playing a piece that came from Charlie Hayden's album Closeness, and on one track, which is called For Turia, he's accompanied by a harp. And when you hear his bass and that harp together, if you close your eyes, the illusion is that the sonic image spreads out from in front of your face all the way around to the sides and slightly behind your ears. And in fact, if you close your eyes while listening, the effect is even more pronounced. And you can turn to what seems to be the side source of information and open your eyes and find yourself staring at the side wall of your listening room. But the ears do not lie, and there you have it. So again, the Avid combo retrieves a great deal of low-level sonic information from discs. But here's what's interesting. Many audio components, turntables, tone arms, phono cartridges, bill themselves as being detailed, but they do it in kind of a draconian, German master sergeant way, which is like, I'm detailed. Achtung, I'm very, very detailed, and you will pay attention. The Avid's not like that. It's rather more a quality that unfolds just as a natural, organic part of the music. And so what's interesting is you might listen to a track that you've heard many times, that's, say, a track that's 4 minutes long, and you play it through the Avid and you become engrossed. And at the end of the 4 minutes, if you're like me, you might have the darndest illusion that, wait a minute, that must have been an 8-minute long track. There was just so much more there. So that it's not something that grabs you by the shirt collar and smacks you around. It's just this quality of, wow, there's a lot to pay attention to, and it's all valuable stuff that contributes to the musical message. And so On various records I played, I found myself just being drawn in and thinking, in simple terms, there's just so much more to listen to here. So I'd say put those things together, and those to me are the primary strengths of the Avid and of the Ionic phono cartridge. The Ionic is, I don't want to give you the wrong impression about this, it is not one of those hyper forgiving cartridges that's forgiving because it's dropping information left and right. No. This is more a cartridge that won't bite you with information retrieval and make you rue the day you ever sat down to listen. Rather, it's a cartridge that it tells you almost as much as you can possibly pay attention to without bitter edges. So, great bass, superb three-dimensionality, effortless, smooth information retrieval. Those are the strengths of this turntable and arm and phono cartridge combo. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Avid Volvere Altus and Ionic package. And if you did, please click on subscribe and subscribe to the Absolute Sounds YouTube channel. Look forward to sharing more audio insights with you over time. Thank you.